A stray cat enters the millionaire's coma room and performs a miracle. While the family fought over inheritance, it was the abandoned animal who woke the unconscious man. In minutes, it did what doctors and machines couldn't achieve in months. The animal's presence sparked scandal, disturbed interests and unearthed family secrets, because sometimes what saves a life costs nothing and annoys those who live by appearances. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The silence on the 12th floor of St. Christopher's Hospital was almost deafening. Not the natural silence of the night, but that artificial kind of quiet, maintained by strict protocols and sterile hallways that seemed to suck away any trace of humanity. There, between white walls and the constant hum of machines, Michael Thompson had remained motionless for 3 months. His robust body, which once commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors, was now completely surrendered to tubes, monitors, and the mechanical routine of the residents on duty. Outside the room, the family took turns in carefully organized shifts, not out of affection, but out of strategy. A constant presence was necessary to show concern, to keep up appearances for the doctors, the company employees, and especially the lawyers who circled the corridors like sleek vultures, always alert to any sign of change. Julia Thompson arrived at the hospital every afternoon, promptly at 5 p.m., not because she wanted to, but because it was her assigned time on the family schedule. She would enter the room with measured steps, sit in the vinyl armchair next to the bed, and stay there for exactly 2 hours. She didn't speak to her father. She didn't hold his hand. She just looked at her phone, answered emails, and waited for the time to pass. To her, the man lying there was a stranger who happened to share her last name and half of her genes. Julia's childhood had been marked by absences. Michael had always been too busy for birthday parties, school plays, or bedtime stories. When he was home, which was rare, he was locked, in his study on the phone, or in front of piles of documents. She learned early on that love in the Thompson family was shown through credit cards with no limit and expensive gifts delivered by assistants. At 32, Julia had built a life far from that universe. She was a freelance photographer, lived in a modest apartment in Greenwich Village, and avoided family social events as much as possible. Her father's coma had forced her to return, but she made sure to maintain the emotional distance that had always existed between them. That Thursday afternoon, however, something different happened. Julia was distracted, editing photos on her laptop when she heard a strange sound. A low meow, almost imperceptible. She looked up and frowned, searching for the source of the noise. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was coming from under the bed. Julia stood up slowly, curious, and bent down to look. There, huddled between the wheels of the hospital bed and the IV stand, was a cat. Small, thin, a calico with patches of orange, white, and black. Its green eyes stared at her with a mixture of caution and curiosity. How the hell did a cat get in here, Julia thought, astonished. The hospital had strict rules about animals, security at every entrance. She looked at the closed door of the room and then back at the creature. It emerged from under the bed with light, almost ethereal movements and walked straight to the head of the bed. Without hesitation, the cat jumped onto the bed, treading delicately on the white sheets, and stopped next to Michael's right hand. Julia stood frozen, watching the scene in disbelief. The animal sniffed the businessman's inert fingers, purred softly, and then, with the most natural air in the world, touched the palm of his hand with its paw. That's when it happened. Michael Thompson, who hadn't shown any significant reaction in 90 days, moved his finger. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but Julia saw it. She held her breath, her eyes wide. The heart monitor emitted a different beep, and from the corner of Michael's right eye, a tear slowly trickled down his pale face. Julia felt her heart race. She took a step forward, then another, until she was right beside the bed, looking back and forth between her father and the cat. The animal was still there, purring softly, its paw still resting on the man's hand. "You're seeing this," she whispered to herself, as if needing to confirm she wasn't hallucinating. The cat turned its head and looked directly into her eyes. There was something in that gaze, a kind of serene wisdom, that completely disarmed Julia. She slowly reached out her hand, and the animal allowed her to pet it. The fur was soft, despite its scruffy appearance. She could feel its ribs under the skin, a sign that the animal lived on the streets and wasn't well fed. But there was something more, a dignity, a presence that went beyond its physical fragility. Julia was so absorbed in the scene that she didn't notice when the door opened. A deep, impatient voice made her turn abruptly. "What is this?" Robert Thompson entered the room with long strides, his impeccable suit clashing with the irritated expression on his face. He was 5 years older than Michael, and, until the stroke that had left his brother unconscious, had always been in the shadow of the successful businessman. Now, as the temporary head of Thompson Holdings, Robert finally had the control he had always craved. And he wasn't about to give it up. "It's a cat, Uncle Robert, obviously," Julia replied in a dry tone. "It shouldn't be here," Robert retorted, already pulling out his phone. "I'm calling security." "Wait," Julia held up her hand. "He caused a reaction." "What?" "My father reacted when the cat touched him. I saw it." Robert looked at his motionless brother on the bed, and then at the animal, which continued to purr calmly. His expression was one of disbelief, mixed with something Julia couldn't identify. Maybe fear. "That's absurd, Julia. It was probably just a muscle spasm." "The doctors already explained that can happen." "It wasn't a spasm," she insisted, her voice firm. "He moved his finger on purpose, and he cried. Did you see the tear?" Robert approached the bed and wiped his brother's face with a tissue as if wanting to erase the evidence. "You're imagining things. In any case, this animal can't stay here. It's unhygienic and against hospital rules." He picked up the cat with rough movements, ignoring its meow of protest, and handed it to Julia. "Take it away. Now." She held the animal against her chest, feeling its racing heart. "Okay," she murmured, more to the cat than to her uncle. "I'll take care of him." Robert nodded, satisfied, and was already leaving the room when Julia asked, "Why were you coming here now? You don't usually show up at this time." The man stopped at the door and turned slowly. "Do I need a specific reason to visit my own brother?" "No, but you have one," she retorted, watching him carefully. Robert smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I have a meeting with the lawyers in 15 minutes. In Dr. Evans's office, legal matters related to the company, nothing you need to worry about." And he left, leaving Julia alone with the cat and a growing sense of suspicion. She looked at her father one more time before leaving. The tear that had run down his face was already dry, but the image remained vivid in Julia's mind. That hadn't been a coincidence. She was sure of it. She went down to the parking garage with the cat still nestled in her arms. The animal seemed to have calmed down, trusting her in a way Julia found strange. Strays were usually skittish, but this one behaved as if it had known her for years. She placed the animal on the back seat of her car, improvising a bed with an old jacket, and drove to her apartment. The whole way her mind was buzzing with questions. How had that cat gotten into the hospital? Why did it go straight to her father's room? And most importantly, why had Michael reacted at that exact moment? At home, Julia prepared water and some tuna she had in the pantry. The cat ate voraciously, but without desperation, maintaining that strange elegance that seemed to be part of it. As she watched it, Julia picked up her phone and started researching animal-assisted therapy and cases of people in comas who had reacted to the presence of pets. There were some interesting reports, but nothing that fully explained what she had witnessed. The connection seemed deeper, almost inexplicable. She stayed up all night thinking. The next day, she decided to do something she had never done before: investigate her father's life. Julia knew little about Michael beyond the obvious. He was a successful businessman, owner of a holding company that controlled several firms in the tech and construction sectors. He was known for being tough in negotiations, demanding with employees, and distant from his family. But what did he do when he wasn't working? Did he have friends, hobbies, causes he cared about? Julia realized, with a pang of shame, that she knew none of this. And maybe it was time to start. She took her laptop and opened her father's social media profiles. Michael was discreet online, rarely posting anything personal. Most of the content was related to the company. But Julia noticed something curious. Every now and then there were photos of him in unexpected places: a public hospital in Queens, a community school in the South Bronx, a homeless shelter downtown. The photos were always formal, with Michael in a suit next to local officials, but there was something in his expression, a slight smile, a softer gaze, as if in those moments he were a different person. Julia clicked on one of the photos, enlarging it, and then she saw it. In the bottom right corner of the image, almost out of frame, was a calico cat. The same color pattern, the same size. Could it be the same animal? She went back to the other photos and started looking, and there it was again, in a photo taken 2 years earlier, at the inauguration of a community library, and in another from 6 months ago, during a visit to a nursing home. Always in the corner, always discreet, but always present. Julia felt a shiver run down her spine. This couldn't be a coincidence. The cat knew Michael, and Michael knew the cat. But how and why? Determined to find out, Julia decided to go to the Thompson Holdings headquarters the next day. She rarely visited her father's office, but now she had a purpose. She needed to talk to someone who had worked there for a long time, someone who might have seen something, noticed something. Upon arriving, she went straight to the reception desk. The woman behind the counter, a lady with grey hair and a kind smile, greeted her politely. "Good morning, Miss Thompson. How can I help you?" Julia hesitated for a moment. "I'm looking for information about my father, about his routine, people who worked closely with him." The receptionist seemed a bit confused. "Well, his personal assistant would be the best person, but she's on leave. Is there anyone else? Someone who's worked here for a long time?" The woman thought for a moment. "There's Connie. She was the family's housekeeper for years and then worked in cleaning here at the office, but she was let go about 3 years ago." Julia felt her heart sink. Let go? Why? The receptionist lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "There was an incident. Something about a valuable item that went missing from your father's office. They accused Connie, but they never proved anything. She was fired anyway. It was a very sad situation, to be honest. She was a wonderful person. Do you know where I can find her? I'm not sure, but I heard she lives out in Queens. Maybe someone in HR has her old address on file." Julia thanked her and went straight to the Human Resources Department. With a bit of persistence and the Thompson name in her favor, she managed to get Connie Miller's address. It was a small apartment in a housing complex in Queens, almost a 2-hour drive from Greenwich Village. Julia didn't think twice. She got in her car and went. The building was old but well maintained. Julia went up to the 4th floor and rang the bell for apartment 42. A woman of about 60 answered the door. She had short grey hair, kind brown eyes, and a surprised expression when she saw who was there. "Miss Julia? Connie?" The woman nodded slowly, still processing the sight. "Please, come in." The apartment was simple but cozy. It smelled of fresh coffee and homemade cake. Connie offered her a cup, and Julia accepted, feeling she needed something to calm her nerves. They sat in the small living room, and Julia got straight to the point. "I need to know about my father, about things he did, places he went." Connie sipped her coffee slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "Why do you want to know this now, after all this time?" "Because I think I never really knew him," Julia admitted, her voice softer. "And now he's there, trapped in a body that doesn't respond, and I realize I know nothing about who he really was." Connie sighed deeply. "Your father was a complicated man, miss. Tough on the outside, but he had a heart that few knew. He did things nobody knew about, helped people without wanting recognition, visited places no rich businessman would ever visit, and he always took that cat with him." "The cat," Julia repeated, leaning forward. "Do you know where it came from?" Connie smiled sadly. "It showed up years ago. Your father was coming home from a meeting late one night and found the little thing injured in the street. He took it home, cared for it, but never kept it locked up. The cat came and went. Sometimes it would be gone for days, but it always came back. And your father, no matter how busy he was, always made time for it. He'd bring it food, Take it for walks. It was the only thing I ever saw your father do out of pure affection, without expecting anything in return. Julia felt tears sting her eyes. Then why did nobody know about this? Why did he hide it? Because he was afraid, Connie said softly. Afraid of being judged, afraid they'd see it as a weakness. Your father grew up in a world where emotions were seen as vulnerabilities. He learned to hide what he felt, but that doesn't mean he didn't feel it. There was a long silence. Julia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And what about you? Why were you fired? Connie's smile vanished. Some important documents went missing from your father's office. Papers he kept in a safe. Someone accused me of taking them, said I had access to the room. Your father didn't defend me. He just nodded when they said I should be let go. I was devastated. After so many years working for the family, to be treated like that. Julia felt anger rising inside her. That's horrible. Connie shook her head. But what you don't know is that 3 months after I was fired, I got a visit. It was your father. He came to my house alone, unannounced. He apologized, said he knew I was innocent, but that he couldn't defend me publicly without exposing who had really stolen the documents. It was someone close, someone in the family. He handed me an envelope with enough money for me to live on for years and helped me get a new job somewhere else. He did it all in secret. Julia was dumbfounded. Who stole the documents? Connie hesitated. I don't know for sure, but I suspect it was Robert. He was always jealous of his brother, always wanted what Michael had. Julia felt her stomach churn. The puzzle was starting to come together. Robert's visits to the hospital, the meetings with lawyers, the rush to get rid of the cat. It all made sense now. He wasn't just managing the company temporarily. He was trying to take permanent control. And the last emotional link between Michael and the conscious world, that cat, was a threat to his plans. Julia stood up suddenly. I have to go back to the hospital. Now. Connie held her hand. If you need help, miss, I'm here. Your father was good to me, even when he couldn't show it openly. I owe him that. Julia drove back to the city centre as if she were on a mission. The cat was at her apartment, but she knew she had to take it back to the hospital. If its presence caused a reaction in Michael, then maybe it was the key to bringing him back. But how could she do it without Robert or the security team stopping her? She needed a plan. When she got home, she found the cat sleeping peacefully on the sofa. It opened its eyes when it saw her and meowed softly, as if asking where she had been. Julia petted it affectionately. We're going to bring him back, she whispered. You and me. We're going to show everyone who my father really was, and we're not going to let them steal that from him. The cat purred, and Julia had the strange feeling that it understood every word. She picked up her phone and dialed Connie. I need your help, she said, when the woman answered. And I think I know exactly how we're going to do this. The early morning in New York City had that heavy air characteristic of the winter months, with a fine mist that turned the streetlights into small yellow halos in the darkness. Julia had been awake for hours, sitting on the living room floor with her laptop and the cat curled up beside her. Since returning from Connie's house, her mind couldn't rest. Each new piece of information about Michael led her in unexpected directions, revealing a man completely different from the one she thought she knew. The stories Connie had shared were just the tip of the iceberg. There was so much more to discover. And Julia felt that time was running out. Robert wasn't a fool. He could see that something had changed in his niece, saw the way she now watched everything more closely, asked uncomfortable questions. It was only a matter of time before he took more drastic measures to consolidate his control over the company and get rid of any obstacles. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, breaking the silence. It was a message from Connie. Got in touch with Mrs. Eleanor. She wants to talk to you tomorrow morning, address attached. Julia frowned. Who was Mrs. Eleanor? She quickly typed, Who is she? The reply came in seconds. She was a nurse at the public hospital where your father used to visit. She saw a lot. Trust me. Julia sighed deeply and saved the address. Another piece of the puzzle. Another person who knew a version of Michael she had never imagined existed. She looked at the cat, who was sleeping peacefully. its front paws stretched out and its belly rising and falling in a serene rhythm. "How did you know?" she murmured, stroking its soft fur. "How did you know he needed you?" The animal opened one eye, meowed softly, and went back to sleep as if the answer were too obvious to explain. The next morning, Julia left the cat at home with enough food and water and headed out early. The address Connie had sent was for a simple house in Astoria, Queens, with a small front garden full of well-tended potted plants. She rang the doorbell and waited. An elderly black woman with white hair and a face marked by deep wrinkles opened the door. Her eyes were piercing, the kind that seemed to see beyond appearances. "You're Michael's daughter," Mrs. Eleanor said, not as a question but as a statement. "I am," Julia confirmed. "Do you know me?" "I know your eyes. They're just like his when he was younger. Come in, child. Let's talk." The inside of the house smelled of rosemary and had a welcoming energy that immediately relaxed Julia's tense shoulders. They sat in the kitchen, where Mrs. Eleanor already had fresh coffee and muffins waiting. "Connie told me about your father," the woman began, pouring coffee into delicate porcelain cups. "Said you're trying to understand who he really was." "I am, and it's harder than I imagined." Mrs. Eleanor smiled. "Sadly, Michael Thompson was a divided man. Half of him belonged to the world of business, of cold contracts and tough decisions. But the other half, the one few saw, belonged to the forgotten. He would show up at the public hospital where I worked, always late in the afternoon, when most of the visitors had already left. He'd bring fruit, books, sometimes toys for the children in the ward. But the most important thing wasn't what he brought. It was the time he gave. He'd sit by the beds, talk, listen to stories. Some people spent weeks there without a single visitor. Your father filled that void." Julia swallowed hard, emotion rising in her throat. "He never did that for me. He never sat by my side to talk when I was a child." Mrs. Eleanor reached out and gently touched Julia's arm. "Sometimes, child, people give to others what they couldn't receive themselves. Your father grew up in a rigid, unaffectionate family. He learned to function that way. But inside, he knew it was wrong. That's why he helped others. It was his way of fixing things, of trying to balance the scales. But why did he hide it? Why didn't he do it publicly? Because he was afraid of judgment, afraid they'd see his actions as a marketing strategy, a way to improve the company's image. He preferred to do it anonymously, to ensure his intentions were pure." Julia wiped away a tear that insisted on falling. "And the cat? How did it fit into all this?" "Ah, the feline," Mrs. Eleanor smiled broadly. "That little creature was your father's visible soul. Where Michael went, the cat went. The children loved it. The elderly, too. It had a way of calming people, you know, as if it knew exactly where to lie down, who needed affection at that moment. Your father used to say the cat had a gift, and I agree. I've seen many animals in my life, but I've never seen one with that kind of presence." Julia stayed for over 2 hours, listening to stories about a Michael she didn't know. A man who paid for surgeries for people who couldn't afford them, who arranged for equipment donations to public hospitals without putting his name on them, who visited forgotten nursing homes and brought music, companionship, and dignity. Each story was a stab to Julia's heart, not of pain but of loss. Loss of years that could have been different. Loss of a father she never had the chance to truly know. When she finally said goodbye to Mrs. Eleanor, Julia was different. There was a new determination in her eyes, an urgency that went beyond curiosity. She had to bring her father back, not just to resolve company issues or stop Robert's plans, but to have a chance to know him, really know him, before it was too late. The phone rang as she was walking back to her car. It was an unknown number. Julia answered cautiously. "Hello? Miss Thompson, this is Dr. Evans from St. Christopher's Hospital. We need to talk. It's about your father." Julia's heart pounded. "Has he gotten worse?" "Not exactly, but there's been a significant change. Can you come to the hospital now?" "I'm on my way." Julia got in her car and sped through the still busy morning streets. Her mind was racing faster than the vehicle. What could have happened? More reactions? A decline? An improvement? When she arrived at the hospital, she went straight to the 12th floor. Dr. Evans was waiting for her in the hallway, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses and a serious expression. He led her to an empty conference room. "Ms. Thompson, your father has shown unusual brain activity in the last 12 hours, waves we haven't seen before. It's a positive sign, but we still need to understand what's causing it." Julia felt relief mixed with hope. Could he be waking up? It's possible, but I want to be honest with you. I've also received a request from Mr. Robert Thompson to conduct a permanent disability assessment. He wants medical documentation to prove that your father has no chance of recovery. Julia's blood boiled. He asked for that? Now, when my father is showing signs of improvement? Dr. Evans nodded gravely. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. Something isn't right here, and as a doctor, my responsibility is to the patient, not to corporate or family interests. I need you to know that I won't make this process easy. I'll request more tests, more time, but I suggest you take legal action to protect your father's rights. Julia thanked him and left the room. She walked past Michael's room. He was there, motionless as always, but now she looked at that body differently. It was no longer the absent, cold father. It was a complex human being, full of contradictions, but also full of hidden kindness. She held his hand, the first time she had done so since the coma began. "Dad," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't know. I didn't know anything, but I know now. And I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to bring you back." She kissed his forehead and left the room with teary eyes. In the elevator, she took out her phone and called Connie. "We need to act fast. Robert is trying to have my father declared permanently incapacitated. We have to get the cat back to the hospital. Tonight." Connie agreed without hesitation. At 8 p.m., they met in the hospital parking garage. Julia had the cat in a discreet carrier bag. The plan was simple but risky. Connie knew the cleaning crew's shifts and had contacts who still worked there. They would go up the service stairs, avoiding the main cameras and the reception security. If everything went right, they could get the animal to the room without being seen. If not, well, they would face the consequences together. They climbed the 12 flights of stairs in silence, Julia's heart pounding with every step. The cat was surprisingly calm inside the bag, as if it understood the importance of the mission. When they reached the hallway of the room, Connie checked that it was empty and signaled for Julia to follow. They quickly entered and closed the door. Julia opened the bag and the cat jumped out, heading straight for the bed as if it had never left. It leaped up with agility, walked over to Michael's hand and repeated the ritual. It sniffed, purred and touched him with its paw. This time the reaction was immediate and stronger. Michael's fingers twitched, lightly squeezing the animal's paw. His eyes, previously shut tight, moved under his eyelids, and then, for the first time in 3 months, Michael opened his mouth and made a sound. It wasn't a word, just a low groan, but it was something. It was life. Julia covered her mouth with her hands, tears now streaming freely. Connie was by her side, also emotional, holding her arm as if for support. The cat remained there serene, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. That's when the door burst open. Robert entered, flanked by 2 hospital security guards. "What do you think you're doing?" His voice was a mixture of fury and disbelief. "Uncle Robert," Julia tried to explain, but he cut her off. "I knew you'd try something like this. That's why I had additional cameras installed in the hallway. You were filmed coming up the service stairs." He turned to the guards. "Remove this animal from here immediately and escort these 2 out of the hospital. They are banned from re-entry without express permission from the administration." Julia stepped forward, placing herself between the guards and the bed. "No, I won't let you do this." "You have no choice," Robert retorted coldly. "I am Michael's legal guardian. My decisions stand. This is for his own good, for the good of the family and the company." Connie, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward. "With all due respect, Mr. Robert, but the good of the company is the last thing on your mind. You want to take permanent control. You want your brother to never wake up." Robert turned to her with cold eyes. And who are you to speak to me like that? A former employee fired for theft. I stole nothing and you know it, just like you know who really took those documents from the safe. Robert turned pale but maintained his composure. Get her out of here, now. The guards moved forward, but before they could touch Connie or Julia, a weak, almost inaudible voice echoed in the room. Julia. Everyone froze. The silence that followed was absolute. Julia turned slowly toward the bed. Michael's eyes were half open, looking directly at her. His mouth moved with difficulty, but it was him. It was real. Dad, she whispered, rushing to the bedside. Dad, are you awake? Michael blinked slowly, as if each movement cost immense effort. His hand, the one the cat was touching, moved slightly, trying to pet the animal. Robert was paralyzed at the door, his expression shifting between shock and fear. One of the guards ran to call the medical team. In seconds, the room was filled with nurses and Dr. Evans, who began efficiently assessing Michael's vital signs. He's responsive, the doctor announced, almost in disbelief. Brain activity has increased significantly. This is extraordinary. He looked at Julia, then at the cat on the bed, and a discreet smile appeared on his face. I think we have a case for the medical journals here. Julia couldn't stop crying. She held her father's hand tightly, feeling his fingers squeeze back, slowly, but with intention. Robert tried to approach, but Connie blocked his path. I think you should leave, she said firmly. You're no longer welcome here. Robert looked around, realizing he had lost control of the situation. With one last venomous glare at Julia, he left the room, his footsteps echoing down the hall. The victory, however, was only partial. Julia knew the battle was far from over. Robert wouldn't give up easily. He had resources, influence, and was willing to use shady means to get what he wanted. But now Julia had something he didn't, the truth, and she was determined to reveal it, no matter the cost. As the medical team continued to monitor Michael, Julia looked at Connie and gave a grateful nod. The woman smiled, her eyes shining with tears. Your father deserves this, she said softly. He deserves to have someone fighting for him, and you're doing it beautifully. In the days that followed, Michael showed slow but steady progress. He began to move his fingers with more coordination, to open his eyes for longer periods, to make sounds that gradually turned into words. The cat remained by his side almost constantly, brought in discreetly by Julia during her visits. The medical staff, impressed with the results, turned a blind eye to the animal's presence, recognizing it as an essential part of the recovery. Dr. Evans even mentioned in a meeting that he was considering writing a paper on the case, exploring the connection between animal-assisted therapy and the recovery of patients from prolonged comas. Julia, for her part, continued to investigate her father's past. Every conversation with people he had helped revealed new layers of complexity. A man who paid for college for a talented young person with no resources. A woman who received help to open a small business after losing everything in a fire. Entire families who were quietly supported in times of crisis. The list was long and moving. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Robert intensified his legal maneuvers. He hired lawyers specializing in family disputes and began to legally question Michael's capacity to manage his business, even with the clear improvement in his clinical condition. He claimed the neurological damage was permanent, and that therefore the management of the company should be permanently transferred to him. Furthermore, he started spreading rumors that Julia was manipulating the situation, using questionable means to influence the doctors and create a false impression of recovery. The tension was at its peak when Julia received an unexpected call. It was from an investigative journalist named Patricia Cole, known for exposing corporate corruption schemes. Miss Thompson, I need to talk to you about your uncle. I have information that might interest you. Julia hesitated, but something in the woman's voice made her agree. They met at a quiet cafe in the West Village. Patricia was a woman in her 40s, with short hair and a sharp gaze. She got straight to the point. I've been investigating Robert Thompson for months. I received anonymous tips about suspicious financial activities at Thompson Holdings. Embezzlement, inflated contracts, payments to offshore accounts. It all started shortly before your father went into a coma. Julia felt her stomach turn. Do you have proof? I have documents, bank statements, emails, but I need someone from inside the company to confirm this. Information, someone with access to the internal records. Why are you telling me this? Because I know you're trying to protect your father, and because I believe Robert went beyond simple financial misconduct. Patricia paused, choosing her words carefully. There are indications that he may have contributed to your father's current state. Julia went cold. What do you mean? Your father didn't just have a spontaneous stroke. The initial tests, which I obtained through hospital sources, showed abnormal levels of certain substances in his blood, substances that can induce cardiovascular events in people with a predisposition. This was never investigated, because Robert, as the legal guardian, blocked any further inquiry. He claimed it was unnecessary, that the diagnosis was clear. Julia felt the world spin. Are you saying my uncle might have poisoned my father? I don't have conclusive proof, Patricia admitted, but I have strong suspicions, and with your help I can get what I need to expose all of this. Julia was silent for a long moment, processing the gravity of the accusations. If it was true, Robert wasn't just an ambitious man. He was dangerous, and he was willing to do anything to get what he wanted. She looked Patricia in the eye. What do you need from me? Access to the company's financial records and testimony from people who worked closely with your father and Robert. Connie, for example. She was dismissed under suspicious circumstances. There might be a connection. Julia nodded slowly. I'll help, but I need assurances that this won't harm my father. He's recovering, and I can't risk his health. Patricia touched her hand across the table. We'll do this as safely as possible. But you need to understand, Miss Thompson, if Robert remains in control, your father may never be truly safe. Julia left the cafe with her mind racing. She called Connie and told her everything. The woman didn't seem surprised. I always knew there was something rotten in this story, she said. Your uncle was never trustworthy. He always had a dark side. If he did what this journalist is suggesting, he needs to pay. But how will we get the proof? Connie thought for a moment. I know someone who still works at the company, a trustworthy person who was always loyal to your father. If we explain the situation, maybe she'll help. The next day, Julia and Connie met with this person, a woman named Sandra, who had worked in the finance department of Thompson Holdings for over 15 years. When she heard the accusations about Robert, Sandra was visibly shaken. I knew something was wrong, she confessed. In recent months, I've received strange orders, transfers to accounts I'd never seen before, documents that would mysteriously disappear. But I was afraid to speak up. Robert made it clear that anyone who opposed him would be fired. Julia held Sandra's hand. I understand your fear, but my father needs justice, and if we don't act now, Robert will consolidate his control and we'll never have a chance to expose the truth. Sandra took a deep breath. I'll help, but we need to be careful. Robert has eyes and ears everywhere. They agreed on a plan. Sandra would discreetly make copies of the relevant financial documents and give them to Patricia. Meanwhile, Julia would continue visiting her father at the hospital, keeping up the appearance that nothing had changed. It was a dangerous but necessary game. Michael continued to improve every day. He could now speak short sentences, though still with difficulty. He recognized Julia, and whenever she entered the room, his eyes would immediately search for the cat. The connection between them was deep and undeniable. In one of these moments, with the cat lying beside him and Julia holding his hand, Michael whispered something that made her freeze. Careful. Robert. She leaned closer. What did you say, Dad? He repeated with more effort. Robert. Danger. He knows. Julia felt a shiver run down her spine. He knows? Knows what? But Michael was already too exhausted to continue. He closed his eyes and rested, his breathing returning to a slow, regular rhythm. Julia left the room with a heavy heart. If her father was warning her about Robert, it meant he knew something that happened before the coma. Maybe he had discovered the financial fraud, maybe he had confronted his brother, and maybe that was the reason for what happened next. She called Patricia immediately. My father just warned me about Robert. He said he's dangerous, that he knows something. Patricia was silent for a moment. This changes everything. If your father knew about the schemes before the coma, it strengthens the hypothesis that Robert acted to silence him. We need to speed up the investigation. How long until we have all the proof? Patricia sighed. Sandra is working on it, but it could take a few weeks. Robert isn't careless. He covered his tracks well. Weeks we might not have, Julia murmured. Night fell over New York, and with it came a growing sense of urgency. Julia returned home and found the cat waiting for her at the window, as if it knew she needed company. She picked it up and sat on the sofa, stroking its soft fur while her mind worked in 1,000 directions. Everything was connecting, the pieces of the puzzle finally making sense. But something was still missing, a definitive piece of evidence, a final link that would tie everything together and expose Robert once and for all. And Julia was determined to find that link, no matter what it cost. The rain started falling over New York City in the early afternoon, in that characteristic way that turns the city into a chaos of traffic and broken umbrellas. Julia was in the makeshift office she had set up in her apartment, surrounded by documents scattered across the table. Sandra had managed to copy the financial files, and together with Patricia, they had been analyzing every suspicious transaction over the past few months. What they discovered was worse than they had imagined. Robert hadn't just been embezzling company funds. He had set up an entire network of shell companies, fraudulent contracts, and payments to accounts in tax havens. The volume of money moved was staggering, reaching millions of dollars. But the most disturbing part was a series of payments made to an obscure pharmaceutical lab 3 weeks before Michael went into a coma. Payments that had no justification in the company's official records. Patricia pointed to the laptop screen. I managed to track down this lab. They've been fined several times for producing drugs without regulatory approval, substances that can cause severe effects if administered incorrectly. Julia felt her blood run cold. You think Robert bought something from them? I think it's more than a possibility. It's practically a confirmation. But we need more. We need someone who can testify about Robert's behavior in the weeks leading up to your father's coma. Someone who was close. Julia thought for a moment. There's Marcia. She was my father's assistant. She worked with him for years. If anyone noticed something strange, it was her. Patricia made a note. Can you get her contact information? I'll try, Julia replied, already grabbing her phone. She called the company's HR department and, using her influence as Michael's daughter, got Marcia's personal number. When the woman answered, Julia was direct. Marcia, this is Julia Thompson. I really need to talk to you about my father. It's urgent. There was a silence on the other end of the line, followed by a heavy sigh. I was waiting for someone to call. Can you come to my house? I'll be here until 6. Julia got in her car and braved the chaotic traffic to reach Bay Ridge in Brooklyn, where Marcia lived. It was a small but cozy apartment with family photos on the walls and the smell of fresh coffee. Marcia was a woman in her 50s, with brown hair tied in a bun and tired eyes that seemed to carry the weight of many secrets. They sat in the living room and Julia got straight to the point. Marcia, I believe my Uncle Robert may have done something terrible to my father, and I need your help to prove it. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. I saw things, Miss Julia, things that made me very uncomfortable. Your uncle started showing up at your father's office more frequently in the weeks before the incident. He always brought coffee, tea, things he said were special, imported. Your father, who was normally suspicious, accepted them because they were gifts from his brother. Julia felt her stomach churn. Do you think he was putting something in the drinks? I'm not sure, but I suspect it. Your father started feeling unwell a few times, headaches, dizziness, nausea. I suggested he see a doctor, but he said it was just fatigue, stress. And then that morning he collapsed in the boardroom. It was so sudden, so violent. Marcia wiped away a tear that ran down her face. I've always blamed myself for not insisting more that he get help. Julia held her hand. It's not your fault. My uncle is the one who has to answer for this. But I need something concrete, something that proves what he did. Marcia stood up and went to a closet in the hallway. She returned with a small box. When your father was hospitalized, I cleaned out his office. I found this hidden in a secret drawer he thought no one knew about. She opened the box, revealing a small brown leather notebook. It was your father's personal journal. He wrote down things that worried him, observations about the company, about the family. The last entries are from just a few days before the coma. Julia took the notebook with trembling hands and began to read. The handwriting was rushed, almost desperate. Robert is acting strangely. Offered to help with some projects, but I don't trust him. I've discovered suspicious movements in the accounts. I need to investigate. Further, on in an entry dated 2 days before the coma. I feel strange, dizzy. Is it stress? Robert insists I drink the tea he brings, says it will help me relax. Maybe I'm being paranoid. The last entry, from the day before the collapse. Confirmed. Robert is embezzling funds. I'm going to confront him tomorrow. I need to protect the company. Protect Julia. Julia closed the notebook, tears now streaming freely. He knew. He knew and he tried to act, but he didn't have time. Marcia nodded. I kept this because I was scared. Scared that if Robert found out, he'd do something to me too. But now seeing your father in that state, seeing you fighting for him, I can't stay silent anymore. Julia hugged the woman tightly. Thank you. You have no idea how much this means. I'm going to use this to make sure my uncle pays for what he did. When she returned home, Julia was emotionally exhausted. The cat greeted her at the door, meowing softly, as if it sensed her anguish. She picked it up and collapsed onto the sofa. We need to finish this, she whispered to the animal. We need to save my father once and for all. But the battle was far from over. In fact, it was about to intensify in a way Julia could never have imagined. The next morning, when she went to the hospital for her daily visit, she found a strange atmosphere on the 12th floor. The nurses seemed tense, the doctors were talking in hushed groups. When she entered her father's room, she immediately knew something was wrong. Michael was agitated, his eyes open but unfocused, his breathing irregular. And the cat wasn't there. Julia felt panic rise in her throat. Where's the cat? One of the nurses, a young woman named Amanda, approached with a worried expression. There was a problem during the night. A storm caused a power outage at the hospital. In the confusion, when the emergency generators kicked in, the cat disappeared. We've searched the entire floor, but we can't find it. What do you mean disappeared? Julia practically shouted. He can't have just vanished. Amanda took a step back, startled by her reaction. We are very sorry, Ms. Thompson. We think he might have gotten scared by the thunder and run out when someone opened the door during the emergency. Julia looked at her father. The monitors showed irregular vital signs, a racing heart, fluctuating blood pressure. It was as if, without the cat's presence, Michael was losing the anchor that kept him connected to life. She knew she had to find the animal, and fast. She ran out of the hospital, calling Connie on her way. The cat is gone. I need your help to find him. Connie didn't hesitate. Where do we meet? Julia thought quickly. Remember the places you said my father visited with the cat? Let's start there. Maybe he went somewhere familiar. They met in front of the public hospital where Mrs. Eleanor worked. It was a logical start. If the cat was looking for a familiar, safe place, that would be a good option. They spent hours searching the area, asking staff and patients if they had seen a calico cat. Nothing. They then went to the community school in the South Bronx, another place Michael frequented. Again, no sign. The afternoon wore on, and Julia's anguish grew with every minute. She called the hospital every hour, checking on her father's condition. With each call, the news was worse. Michael was regressing. The signs of improvement gained over the past weeks seemed to be rapidly unraveling. It was as if his will to fight was disappearing along with his little companion. Connie, walking beside Julia through the busy streets, placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll find him. I'm sure of it. That cat is special. He won't just disappear forever. But as they searched, another piece was moving on the board. Robert, informed of the animal's disappearance and the decline in Michael's condition, called an emergency meeting of the Thompson Holdings Board of Directors. Without notifying Julia, He presented the documents he had requested. From the doctors, documents that, while incomplete and contestable, suggested that Michael Thompson would not be able to resume his duties. He proposed that Michael be declared permanently incapacitated and that he, Robert, officially take over as president of the company. Some board members hesitated, recalling the recent signs of improvement, but Robert was skillful. He used the rhetoric of the company's well-being, the need for stable leadership, the importance of making tough decisions in critical moments. And he won the support of the majority. The vote was scheduled for 2 days from now, if Julia couldn't turn the situation around by then. She would lose not only the company but any chance of protecting her father from her uncle's sinister plans. Night fell again over New York, and Julia was exhausted, physically and emotionally. She and Connie had covered dozens of miles, spoken to hundreds of people, but the cat seemed to have vanished without a trace. Sitting on a park bench near one of the shelters Michael used to visit, they took a forced break. Connie offered a bottle of water, and Julia drank it in long gulps. "I don't know where else to look," she admitted, her voice broken with emotion. "And my father is getting worse, I can feel it. It's like they're connected in a way that's beyond our understanding." Connie looked up at the night sky, where a few stars stubbornly appeared between the clouds. "Your father always said that animals have a wisdom we've lost. They feel things, perceive connections that human logic can't grasp. If this cat is as special as he seems, he'll come back. But maybe he's not the one who needs to be found. Maybe it's your father who needs to call him." Julia looked at the woman, confused. "What do you mean?" Connie turned to her. "Your father is fighting, but maybe he doesn't know what for. Maybe he needs a stronger reason to come back. Have you tried talking to him? Really talking? Telling him what you're doing for him?" Julia realized with a shock that she hadn't. Since Michael had started to wake up, she had been so busy with investigations, evidence, and legal battles that she had barely spoken to him in a meaningful way. She had held his hand, said generic words of encouragement, but had never opened her heart, never said what she truly felt. Connie continued. "He spent his whole life hiding his emotions because he was afraid of being vulnerable. Maybe he needs to hear from you that it's okay to feel, that it's okay to be weak sometimes, that he doesn't have to hide anymore." Julia felt something break inside her, a dam that had held back years of hurt, resentment, and unspoken love. "You're right. I need to talk to him. I need to tell him everything I never said." They returned to the hospital well after 10 p.m. Julia entered the room silently. Michael was sleeping, his breathing weak and irregular. She pulled the chair close to the bed, held his hand, and began to speak. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I know you can hear me, and I need you to know a few things. First, I always thought you didn't love me, that I wasn't important to you. But now I know the truth. I know about the people you helped, the places you visited, the lives you touched. I know about the cat, the way you cared for him without wanting recognition. I know you have a huge heart, but you learned to hide it because you were afraid." The tears were flowing freely now. "And I forgive you, Dad. I forgive you for all the parties you missed, for all the hugs you didn't give, for all the conversations we never had. Because now I understand. You were trying to be strong the way you were taught, but you don't have to be that way anymore. You can come back, you can be vulnerable, you can be human, and I'll be here. I'll be here to meet the real Michael Thompson." She paused, wiping her eyes. "And about Robert? I know what he did. I have the proof. I'm going to protect you, Dad. I'm going to protect everything you've built, but I need you to fight. I need you to come back completely. Because without you, none of this makes sense." As Julia spoke, something extraordinary happened. Michael's fingers, which had been limp, began to move. Not much, just a slight squeeze on her hand. But it was intentional. It was a response. She looked at his face and saw in the corners of his closed eyes tears streaming down. "Dad," she whispered, squeezing back. "You're there. I know you are." Michael slowly opened his eyes. He was weak, but there was clarity there, an awareness that hadn't existed before. He looked at Julia and, with visible effort, said a single word. "Sorry." Julia couldn't hold back her sobs. She hugged her father, feeling the weakness of his body against hers, but also feeling something stronger. Love. Finally, after so many years, she felt her father's love. When she pulled away, Michael was still looking at her. His lips moved again, forming words with difficulty. Cat. Need. I know, Dad, we're looking. We'll find him, I promise. Michael gestured with his head, indicating something. Julia followed his gaze and realized he was pointing to a notebook on the bedside table. It was an old leather journal, similar to the one Marcia had given her, but different. She picked it up and opened it. Inside was a hand-drawn map of New York City, with several locations marked: hospitals, schools, shelters. But there was one place that was circled several times, with a star next to it. It was a location in the South Bronx, an old abandoned warehouse that had been turned into an informal refuge for stray animals. Julia looked at her father. He's here. Michael nodded slightly, exhausted by the effort. Always. Goes. Back. There. Julia kissed his forehead. I'll get him now. Stay strong, Dad. I'll be right back. She ran out of the hospital, calling Connie on the way. I have an address. My father knew where the cat might be. They met in front of the shelter less than an hour later. It was a dark place, in an abandoned industrial area. The gate was ajar, creaking in the wind. Julia and Connie entered carefully, using their phone flashlights to light the way. Inside there were dozens of animals. Cats, dogs, some injured, others just scared. And at the back of the warehouse, in a corner protected by old boxes, was the calico cat. He was lying down, clearly injured. One of his hind legs was at a strange angle, probably broken. Next to him were other cats, as if they were taking care of him. Julia approached slowly, speaking softly so as not to startle him. Hey, buddy, remember me? The cat lifted its head and meowed weakly. It recognized Julia immediately. She picked him up carefully, wrapping him in her coat. We're taking you home. My father is waiting for you. Connie was already on the phone, calling an emergency vet she knew. They took the cat straight to the nearest veterinary clinic. The diagnosis was quick: a fractured leg, dehydration, and exhaustion. But nothing that couldn't be treated. The vet, a kind man named Dr. Paul, performed the surgery immediately. It took almost 3 hours, but it was successful. The cat would have a cast for a few weeks, but he would make a full recovery. When he finally woke up from the anesthesia, Julia was there, gently stroking his head. You're a fighter, she said with a tired smile, just like my father. Now let's go back to him, and we'll win this battle together. The sun was rising when Julia and Connie returned to St. Christopher's Hospital. They went up to Michael's room, carrying the cat carefully. When they entered, Michael was awake, his eyes fixed on the door, as if he knew they were coming. Upon seeing the animal, even injured and weakened, his face lit up. He reached out his hand, and the cat, despite the pain, made an effort to get to him. Julia placed him carefully on the bed, and the animal curled up next to her father, purring softly. Michael stroked the soft fur, and for the first time in months, he smiled. A genuine smile, full of relief and gratitude. Julia watched the scene with her heart overflowing. That connection, that silent love between man and animal, was proof that her father was more than she had ever known. And now, with him coming back and the cat by his side, it was time to face Robert head-on. It was time to seek justice. The days following Michael's reunion with the cat were marked by a remarkable transformation. It was as if the presence of his small companion had ignited a flame that was nearly extinguished. Michael began to speak in complete sentences, slowly at first, with difficulty, but gradually with more clarity and strength. His memory returned in waves, bringing back recollections he shared with Julia during the long hours she spent by his side. Stories about his childhood, about how he met Julia's mother, about the early years of building the company, but also about his regrets, the choices he would make differently if he could turn back time. Julia listened intently, feeling that every word was a gift, a chance to know the father she had always wished for. But as Michael recovered, Robert intensified his moves. The board meeting to vote on his permanent appointment as company president was scheduled for the following Monday, only 3 days away. Julia knew she had to act fast. With the help of Patricia Cole, the investigative journalist, she organized all the evidence they had collected, the financial documents Sandra had secured, showing the embezzlement and suspicious transfers, Michael's personal journal where he recorded his suspicions about his brother, Marcia's testimony about Robert's strange behavior in the weeks before the coma, and the records from the pharmaceutical lab, which Patricia had obtained through her sources, proving the purchase of dangerous substances. It was an impressive arsenal, but Julia needed to present it in the right way at the right time to ensure maximum impact. On Friday morning, Michael sat up in bed for the first time since the coma, still weak, needing support, but it was immense progress. The cat was by his side, its leg still in a cast, but already moving better. Dr. Evans was in the room conducting a full evaluation. "Mr. Thompson," he said with a smile, "your progress is extraordinary. I'd even say miraculous. I'm considering discharging you in a week if we continue at this pace." Michael nodded, but his gaze was serious. "Doctor, I need a favor. I need you to prepare a complete medical report on my current condition, detailed, proving that I am in full recovery of my mental faculties and that I am fit to gradually resume my activities." The doctor frowned. "I can do that, but may I ask why?" "It's for the board meeting," Julia explained. "My uncle is trying to have my father declared permanently incapacitated. We need to prove that's a lie." Dr. Evans crossed his arms, thoughtful. "I see. I'll prepare the report today. But, Mr. Thompson, I must warn you, even with this surprising recovery, you are still fragile. You cannot be subjected to excessive stress." "I understand, Doctor," Michael replied firmly, "but some things can't wait. My brother needs to be confronted, and I need to be there when it happens." Julia touched her father's shoulder. "Dad, you don't have to go to the meeting. I can represent you, present the evidence." "No, Julia." Michael held her hand. "I need to do this myself. Robert has always seen me as cold, distant, easy to manipulate. He would never expect me to come back, never expect me to fight. It's time to show him who I really am." Julia saw the determination in her father's eyes and knew it was useless to argue. "All right," she agreed, "but we'll do it our way. We'll prepare properly, and we'll make sure that when we walk into that room, we're holding all the cards." Over the weekend, Julia worked tirelessly. She met with Patricia to fine-tune the details of the article that would be published right after the board meeting, exposing all of Robert's crimes. She spoke with Sandra and Marcia, ensuring they were prepared to testify if needed. And she spent hours with Connie, organizing the sequence of revelations they would make at the meeting. Michael, for his part, focused on regaining his strength. He did light physical therapy, guided by the doctors, and worked on his motor coordination. Every movement took effort, but he was determined. The cat rarely left his side, as if it understood the importance of the moment. On Sunday night, Julia was sitting with her father in the hospital room. The cat slept between them, purring softly. "Dad," she said quietly, "are you sure you want to do this? Robert is dangerous. If he feels cornered, we don't know what he's capable of." Michael looked at his daughter with a gentle expression. "Julia, I've spent my whole life being afraid. Afraid of showing weakness, afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being vulnerable. That fear cost me a lot. It cost me a real relationship with you. It cost me years of happiness." He petted the cat who stirred in its sleep. "But this little guy taught me something. He taught me that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up even when it seems impossible. And it's about having someone by your side, even if it's a stray cat who reminds you that you're not alone." Julia felt tears well up in her eyes. "You're not alone, Dad. I'm here, and I always will be." Michael smiled, that genuine smile she had grown to love over the past few weeks. "I know, honey, and that means more to me than you can possibly imagine." They sat there in comfortable silence until exhaustion took over, and they both fell asleep, lulled by the cat's purring. Monday arrived with a grey sky over New York, threatening rain. Julia woke up early, getting ready with care. She chose a sober suit, hair tied back, discreet makeup. She wanted to appear professional and serious. She arrived at the hospital at 8 a.m. Michael was already awake, being helped into his clothes by nurses. He had chosen one of his favorite suits, which Julia had brought from home. He had lost weight, the suit was loose, but there was a dignity about the man preparing to face his brother. Connie arrived, soon after, bringing a special, more comfortable wheelchair she had managed to borrow from a friend. The cat was left in the care of Mrs. Eleanor, who had insisted on coming to the hospital to help. "Don't you worry," she said with a warm smile. "I'll take care of him like he's my own. You go and get justice." Michael thanked her with a nod, and then they left. The Thompson Holdings headquarters was in the heart of Manhattan, an imposing building of glass and steel that reflected the company's power and influence. When Michael, Julia, and Connie arrived using a side entrance that led directly to the executive elevators, they avoided unnecessary attention. They went up to the 25th floor, where the boardroom was located. It was almost 10 o'clock. The meeting was scheduled to start at 10 sharp. Julia pushed her father's wheelchair down the silent corridors, her heart pounding. She could hear voices coming from the meeting room. Robert was already there, probably making his case. They stopped in front of the closed door. Michael took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and looked at Julia. "Ready?" She nodded. "Ready." Connie opened the door dramatically, and the three of them entered the room. The silence that followed was absolute. 12 board members sat around the enormous mahogany table, all with shocked expressions. Robert, who was standing at the end of the room giving a presentation, turned white as a sheet. His face went through a rapid sequence of emotions. Surprise, fear, and then rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he managed to say, his voice betraying his nervousness. "Michael can't be here. He's in a coma." "As you can see, Robert," Michael said, his voice firm despite his physical weakness. "I am no longer in a coma, and I have come here to exercise my rights as chairman and founder of this company." One of the board members, an elderly gentleman named Dr. Anderson, stood up with a smile. "Michael, what a joy to see you recovered. This is wonderful." Other members joined in the greetings, clearly relieved and happy. But Robert remained frozen, his mind working furiously. Julia pushed the wheelchair to the head of the table, the place of honor reserved for the chairman. Michael gestured for everyone to sit. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," he began, his voice gaining strength. "I know. My brother called this meeting to declare my permanent incapacitation and officially assume my position. I understand your concern for the stability of the company, but I am here to tell you that not only have I recovered, but I have also discovered things during my forced absence that need to be addressed immediately." Robert tried to interrupt. "Michael, you just came out of a 3-month coma. You're in no condition to—" "Silence, Robert," Michael cut in, his voice now authoritative. "You will listen to me, everyone will listen to me. Julia, please." Julia took a folder she had brought and began distributing copies of the documents to each board member. They flipped through the papers with growing concern. "What you are looking at is proof of systematic embezzlement of company funds," Michael explained. "Millions of dollars transferred to offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, payments to shell companies, all orchestrated by my brother over the past few years, but intensified in recent months." Robert shot to his feet, his chair toppling behind him. "That's a lie, it's a setup," Michael continued, unfazed. "I also have here suspicious payments to a pharmaceutical lab that produces unregulated substances that, coincidentally, can induce severe cardiovascular events." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Substances that were found in my blood when I was hospitalized." The atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. The board members looked at Robert with horror and disbelief. Dr. Anderson was the first to speak. "Robert, these are extremely serious accusations. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Robert was visibly shaking now, caught between denial and panic. "Are you going to believe him? He just woke up from a coma. He could be confused, delusional." Michael opened his personal journal, the one Marcia had kept. "I have here my own notes, dated before my collapse. records of my suspicions, of the investigations I began. I knew what you were doing, Robert, and you knew that I knew." Julia then stood up. "And we have witnesses willing to speak about your behavior in the weeks before my father's coma, about how you brought him drinks and food, insisting that he consume them, about how he began to feel unwell repeatedly." Connie also took a stand. "And I will testify about how I was unjustly accused of theft to cover up your own actions, Mr. Robert," Michael confirmed. "You stole documents from my safe to hide evidence of your crimes, and when Connie was accused, I couldn't defend her publicly without exposing you as the real culprit. It was cowardly of me, and I have apologized to her. But now, the truth must come out." Robert tried one last time to defend himself, but his voice was failing. "You can't do this to me. I've dedicated my life to this company." "You've dedicated your life to envy," Michael said, his voice heavy with sadness. "You always wanted what I had. It was never enough to be my brother, to be part of the family. You had to be me, and when you couldn't, you decided to eliminate me." The silence that followed was heavy. One of the board members, a woman named Dr. Bennett, spoke. "If these accusations are true, this is a serious crime. We need to involve the authorities immediately." Michael nodded. "It's already being done. The journalist Patricia Cole, who has been investigating this case for months, will publish a full report tomorrow. The authorities have been informed and an investigation will be opened. But before anything else, this board needs to decide. Do you want to keep a criminal at the head of this company, or do you want to do what is right?" The vote was unanimous. Robert was immediately removed from all his duties at the company. Security was called to escort him out of the building. As he was being led away, Robert looked at Michael with pure hatred. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you." Michael just shook his head sadly. "You've already destroyed yourself, Robert. I'm just protecting what's left of our family and our company." When Robert left, the tension in the room eased considerably, but there was still work to be done. Michael spent the next hour explaining his plans for the company to the board. He would be chairman again, but in a different way. More transparent, more humane, more focused on positive social impact. He wanted to implement serious corporate responsibility programs, not just for image, but because he believed it was the right thing to do. And Julia would be appointed vice president, working alongside him to ensure this new vision became a reality. The board members, still processing everything that had happened, agreed to the proposals. Some asked questions, others expressed concerns. But overall there was a sense of relief and hope. When the meeting finally ended, it was past noon. Michael was visibly exhausted, but also relieved. Julia took him back to the hospital, where the cat was waiting for them anxiously. As soon as Michael settled into bed, the animal jumped up beside him, purring loudly and rubbing its head against his face. Michael laughed, a sound Julia couldn't remember ever hearing before. It was a genuine, light laugh, full of joy. In the following weeks, the story made headlines. Patricia's report was published, detailing Robert's entire scheme. He was indicted on multiple charges: embezzlement, corporate fraud, and attempted murder. The legal process would be long, but the evidence was solid. Meanwhile, Michael continued his recovery at home, now discharged from the hospital. The cat was always by his side, fully recovered from its fracture. Julia temporarily moved into her father's house, wanting to be close during this transition period. The relationship between them blossomed in ways neither had ever imagined possible. They talked for hours, shared meals, laughed together. Michael visited Julia's apartment in Greenwich Village, saw her photographs, understood her art. And Julia got to know the father behind the businessman, the man who loved animals, helped strangers and kept a kind heart under layers of protection. Michael also made a point of righting past wrongs. Connie was officially reinstated, not as an employee, but as a senior consultant for social responsibility, a position created especially for her. Marcia received a promotion and public recognition for her loyal work. Sandra was protected from any retaliation and also promoted, and Mrs. Eleanor, along with others who had been quietly helped by Michael over the years, were invited to a special ceremony at the company. There, publicly, Michael spoke about his anonymous work, about his visits to hospitals, schools, and shelters. He explained that for a long time he had been afraid to show that side of himself, but that he now understood that hiding kindness protected no one. It only perpetuated the idea that compassion is weakness. The audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. There were tears on many faces, including Michael's. It was a new beginning, not just for him, but for everyone who was part of this story. The company implemented significant changes. A portion of the profits was allocated to a permanent fund to support social causes. Animal-assisted therapy programs were created in partnership with public hospitals, inspired by Michael's own experience. Community schools received investments to improve infrastructure and offer more opportunities for underprivileged children. And a shelter for stray animals was built, named the Hope Center, in honor of the cat that had saved Michael's life. The cat itself, which had never had an official name, was named Hope by Julia, and the name stuck. Hope became a sort of mascot for the company's social initiatives, appearing in campaigns and regularly visiting the places the company supported. Children adored him, as did the elderly. He continued to have that special gift of knowing exactly where his presence was most needed. Months later, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, Julia and Michael were in the garden of the house, watching Hope play among the flowers. "You know," Julia said thoughtfully, "I spent so much time being angry at you, thinking you were incapable of love. And in the end, I discovered you always loved. You just didn't know how to show it." Michael took his daughter's hand. "I'm sorry for that, Julia. I'm deeply sorry. I missed so many moments with you because of fear. But I thank God every day that I got this second chance. Not just to live, but to be truly alive, to feel, to love, to be human." They sat there in comfortable silence until Hope came and jumped into Michael's lap. The businessman stroked the animal's soft fur, and the cat purred, that sound that had become synonymous with peace and healing. "It's funny," Michael said softly. "I spent my whole life building empires, closing deals, accumulating power. And in the end, it was a little stray cat that taught me what really matters." Julia smiled. "And what matters, Dad?" Michael looked at her, his eyes shining. "Connection, love, being present, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and never being afraid to start over, even when all seems lost." Time passed, and life went on. Robert faced the justice system, was convicted, and served his sentence. But Michael, despite all the pain his brother had caused, never stopped visiting him in prison. He brought books, talked, offered support, so that Robert could one day rehabilitate himself and rebuild his life with dignity. It was a form of forgiveness that surprised many, but it made sense to those who knew the new Michael. He had learned that holding a grudge only poisoned one's own soul, and that true strength lay in offering redemption even to those who didn't deserve it. Julia continued to work at the company alongside her father, but she never abandoned photography. In fact, she started a photo project documenting the stories of the people the company helped, powerful portraits of overcoming, resilience, and hope. The photos were exhibited in galleries and even published in a book that became a benchmark in social photography. Connie became one of the most respected voices in corporate responsibility in the country, giving lectures at universities and companies on ethics, justice, and the power of compassion in the business world. Hope continued his silent mission of bringing comfort where it was needed. As he grew older, his steps became slower, but his presence remained as powerful as ever. Michael, now in stable health and living a life full of meaning, spent each day with gratitude. He would wake up early, meditate with Hope by his side, work a few hours at the company, and dedicate his afternoons to social projects and his family. He met Julia's boyfriend, literature professor, and the two got along well, sharing long conversations about books and life. He began writing his memoirs, not for personal glory, but to leave a record of the lessons he had learned, hoping they might help others avoid his mistakes. He was a transformed man. Not perfect, he still had difficult days, moments of doubt, but he was whole in a way he had never been before. One winter afternoon, 3 years after waking from the coma, Michael was in his home office when Hope, now quite old, climbed onto his lap with difficulty. The cat settled. In purred softly and closed his eyes. Michael stroked his greying fur, feeling his heart ache. He knew. He knew his little friend was tired, that he had fulfilled his mission. "Thank you," he whispered, tears silently streaming down his face. "Thank you for saving me, for teaching me how to truly live." Hope opened his eyes one last time, looked at Michael with that deep, wise gaze, and then fell asleep. He fell asleep peacefully, surrounded by love, exactly as he deserved. Julia found her father a few hours later, still holding the small body, crying softly. She knelt beside him, and together they paid their last respects to the friend who had changed everything. Hope was buried in the garden of the house under a leafy tree that Michael had planted months earlier, precisely for this day. There was no elaborate monument, just a simple stone plaque with the inscription, "Hope, our friend, our teacher, our light. Rest in peace, knowing your love lives on in every life you touched." Michael and Julia would visit the spot regularly, talking to the spirit of their friend, thanking him for everything. And life went on, but now with a lightness and depth that only true love can bring. A few months later, Michael was returning home from a visit to one of the support centers when he saw an abandoned kitten on the sidewalk. It was small, thin, scared. For a moment he hesitated. The pain of losing Hope was still fresh, but then he remembered the last words he had said to his friend. Life goes on, and so does love. He bent down, held out his hand, and the kitten, after a moment of hesitation, approached. Michael smiled. "Looks like we have a new friend, Julia," he said, on the phone minutes later. "Can you pick up some cat supplies?" Julia laughed on the other end of the line. "Of course, Dad. What are we going to name him?" Michael looked at the small animal now nestled in his arms. "How about Phoenix?" "Perfect," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's perfect." And so the story continued, a story of forgiveness, redemption, love, and second chances. A story that proved it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the best version of yourself. And that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places and the most unlikely teachers. Michael Thompson, once a cold and distant businessman, was now a whole man, a present father, a compassionate leader, a complete human being. And all because a little stray cat had the courage to walk into a hospital room and touch the hand of a lost man, reminding him that there was still love in the world, and that this love was worth fighting to preserve. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Michael, Julia, and Hope has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of redemption, forgiveness, and second chances, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it the reunion between father and daughter, the silent love of Hope, the transformation of Michael? Every day we bring intense and inspiring stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul. Stories that remind us that it's never too late to start over, to love, to forgive. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another narrative that will make you reflect on what truly matters in life. Until then, remember, love always finds a way, even in the darkest of times.